taught to, downplay your achievements, don't get a swelled head. Did some of you get those messages from parents or teachers or whatever? I think it's a pretty common set of messages. I don't think I'm unique in this. And I had very loving, affirming parents. Even with very loving, affirming parents, there was still this underlying instruction to, don't boast, play it down, don't make a fuss about yourself, you're no better than anybody else. And I believe that's true. I'll get to that again in a minute. But I've also come to believe that until we have a deep core sense of our own inherent worth and dignity, it's really hard to honor anybody else's. Now, I have a real love-hate relationship with this cultural concept of self-acceptance. You remember the book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. And this need to accept ourselves as we are. I've come to believe it's really important, but as I've said, I've also absorbed enough of that Calvinistic judgment of our culture to feel as though too much self-acceptance becomes dangerous. It can sort of tip over into arrogance and self-righteousness. There's something suspect about feeling too good about yourself. But in fact, we're much more likely to behave arrogantly when we're feeling threatened or insecure. The more comfortable we are with ourselves, the more easily we accept others as they are. This is why I love the story of Ferdinand. He was so comfortable with himself. He wasn't defensive. He didn't try to prove anything. He didn't want to fight, and so he didn't fight. But he didn't judge the young bulls who did want to fight. They were being who they were, and he was being who he was. And he just sat there quietly and smelled the flowers. The story of Ferdinand has a very Buddhist feeling to me. Rather like a wise monk in meditation. He simply sits, mindful of each moment, at home in himself. He doesn't think he's better than the other bulls, but neither does he think that they are better than he is. Now, as many of you know, my primary spiritual source has become, over the years, much to my own surprise, the Christian story. And I turn to the Gospels and the stories about Jesus more than any other tradition to figure out the meaning of my life and how I want to live, what it means to me to be in relationship with people and with God. But so much of the interpretation of the Christian story has emphasized the sinful nature of humankind and the brokenness of the world, that even though I don't believe for 1 minute that that was the message Jesus was trying to convey, I still sometimes have trouble when it comes to this question of self-acceptance, looking to the Christian story, because it's hard for me to sift out all that sin and find those affirmations of human goodness. Buddhism is sometimes much more helpful in meeting that need. Years ago, when I was really struggling with some issues in my life, my sister gave me a wonderful little paperback by a Buddhist teacher named Chogyam Trungpa. He's the founder of the Naropa Institute and a renowned teacher of Buddhism. And a lot of his writing is very dense, the kind of writing that no matter what tradition it's in, I feel the same way about dense Christian theology as I do about dense Buddhist philosophy. I start to read it and I realize it's just way over my head. It's so abstract and so theoretical, and I just can't do anything with it. But this little book called Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, is completely different. It's very accessible. It's a small, I had the little Bantam paperback. Now I think they only do it in the fancier trade paperback style. It's in 2 parts, and I have to admit I've never even read part 2. But I've read part 1 over and over and over. And I want to read the beginning of the 2nd chapter, which is called Discovering Basic Goodness. Trungpa writes, "A great deal of chaos in the world occurs because people don't appreciate themselves. Having never developed sympathy or gentleness toward themselves, they cannot experience harmony or peace within themselves, and therefore what they project to others is also inharmonious and confused. When you don't punish or condemn yourself, when you relax more and appreciate your body and mind, you begin to contact the fundamental notion of basic goodness in yourself. So it is extremely important to be willing to open yourself to yourself. Developing tenderness toward yourself allows you to see both your problems and your potential accurately. You don't feel that you have to ignore your problems or exaggerate your potential. That kind of gentleness toward yourself and appreciation of yourself is very necessary. It provides the ground for helping yourself and others. Trungpa goes on to say that it's the simple practice of sitting meditation that allows us to learn how to do this. And he says, by meditation here, we mean something very basic and simple that is not tied to any one culture. We are talking about a very basic act, sitting on the ground, assuming a good posture, and developing a sense of our spot, our place on this earth. This is the means of rediscovering ourselves and our basic goodness, the means to tune ourselves into genuine reality without any expectations or preconceptions. And then my favorite, probably, quotation from the entire book. He says, this method of synchronizing your mind and body is training you to be very simple and to feel that you are not special, but ordinary, extraordinary. You sit simply, and out of that, a sense of individual dignity arises. You are sitting on the earth, and you realize that this earth deserves you, and you deserve this earth. You are not special, but ordinary, extraordinary. The beauty of this approach is that it reminds us that what we experience of goodness in ourselves is equally present in everybody else. We can be absolutely wonderful without being special. It's the difference between being good and being better than. We're all good, but none of us are better than. It's the better than that gets us into trouble. I mentioned that I've read part 1 over and over. That's because it's hard for me to absorb it and believe it. I think we live in a culture that really does not encourage that kind of gentle, simple self-acceptance. It probably would have been easier to write a sermon about how far short we fall of our ideals and how desperately we need to clean up our acts. But Trungpa says over and over in different ways that we need to be gentle with ourselves so that we can allow our hearts to be tender and open. It's that open heart, that tender heart, that allows us to feel our own worth and then see it reflected in everyone else as well. It's not that we're special, it's that we're ordinary, extraordinary, just like everyone else. We're each an ordinary, everyday miracle. And as Pablo Casals says, can you then harm another who is, like you, a marvel? When we know ourselves and everyone else to be such marvels, then we can live out that first principle in a whole new way. Of course, my judgment-laden Calvinistic self has to add here before I close, it's not that everything about the way we live and behave is just fine. It's not that we never have to try to come closer to being who we're meant to be. We do fall short. We do need to remind ourselves to live out our principles more fully. So I guess I really have come back through all my pondering to come as you are and then change. Just change into more of who you're really meant to be, not try to become something else. I think the way to live out our faith more deeply is to begin with ourselves, not with judgment and self-criticism, but with compassion and a genuine desire to live more fully into the wholeness of who we really are. So come as you are, and then become even more yourself. Trust your own worth and dignity enough to live from a place of confidence and compassion toward everyone else you meet.